With another attempt on Trump, although lackluster, there has been another stone cast, another nail hammered into the coffin, right? The changing of the zeitgeist towards a environment that is, most people would say, is undesirable. Political environment where violence is sanctioned or normalized. There doesn't really seem to be a proper conversation being had to move us away from it. Everything I've seen is primarily centered and focused on punishment, to say, if your side is doing something, we need to pursue you, persecute you, right? The entirety of the narrative around it doesn't matter what the January Sixers do, we just need to arrest them and get rid of these people, right? It doesn't matter. We need to arrest and target all these Antifas. None of this conversation is about stemming the flow of people into these two camps. Yes, you have some radicalization, but the problem is that the horde of zombies is growing, right? We're trapped on the train to Busan, and just cart by cart people are being slowly consumed and assimilated into the mind virus. Frankly, I still think that we're at a point where it's salvageable. But so long as our political leaders fail to actually have a proper conversation about it, then it's not going to stop. And so my goal here is to figure out and to open the door to the conversation about what do we do? Where do we go? How do we even begin to talk about this? How do we convince people to back up off the ledge, to not pursue the world of vengeance and violence? That's a dirty, gritty world. It would not be anything that anyone would recognize, anybody today would recognize. It seems to me that this book by Eric Hoffer, written in 1951, already did that for us. Hoffer worked in his early life as a longshoreman or just a dock worker and spent a good portion of his early adulthood during the Great Depression. I imagine he was subjected to some of the worst conditions of that time period in America. He seems to be a German immigrant and basically just spent most of his time self reading, self studying, and thinking about whatever interested him. And in 1951, he decided to finally publish his book, The True Believer: Thoughts on the Nature of Mass Movements. So he was not formally educated, he was not a formal professor, he did not go to university, but yet he still wrote and thought about this book. And to me, that is probably one of the most shocking aspects of this. He became a slightly celebrated thinker over the next coming decades, sort of one of the leading contemporary conservative thinkers. The True Believer is the one that sort of stuck through time, considered his magnum opus. I imagine his choice to write this is a combination of his German ancestry and the zeitgeist of the time trying to sort of rationalize the World War II outcome, the events that took place, the Holocausts, the scale of the war, the invasions, the what drove the world to basically kill off hundreds of millions of people. And to me, it seems like something that's different is rather than, again, talking about the punishment, rather than focusing on the impact and the necessity of something like the Nuremberg trials, he focuses on the people involved. It is not Hitler he talks about. It is not Mussolini he talks about. It is not the Japanese leadership he talks about. Or when he talks about revolutions, modern revolutions, he does not talk about George Washington and the American Revolution. He does not talk about Robespierre in regards to the French Revolution or Cromwell when it comes to the English Civil War. He talks about the mindset and the conditions of the people, right? Obviously, these leaders have parts, but he does not see it that way. He thinks these movements are built bottom up rather than top down the way something like the Nuremberg trials approached it, starting with the most highest forms of leadership all the way at Goring and working its way down until it believed that it couldn't prosecute people anymore. That's one thing that attracted me to this book. Another is the fact that he writes in aphorisms. I find that similar to the way Nietzsche does, except he doesn't write poetry, he writes formalized thoughts rather than snarky, poetic imagery. He's very descriptive, going from this is this thought, this is the next thought, here's how it builds on this, and he continues this sort of building of the pyramid of mass movements through the book. If we look at the table of contents, you can clearly see he begins with an introduction, right? The types of people involved, the potential converts, as he calls them. Then he moves into the actual inner workings and structures and buildings that form on top of those converts, the things that unite them, the things that motivate them. And then he finishes with the very top of people, right? The men of words, the leaders, the Marats, the Goebbels, the genuine crazed believers. In the man of action, the sort of utilitarian general, able to take control, create a structure, create a formalized sense of order out of the embodied chaos. Everything sort of piecemeals together into a nice, cohesive understanding, and it's very intuitive. Before I actually start on the ideas, the way I want to sort of imagine this is sort of like building a house where we start with the foundation, we put the frames, we put in the walls, we put on our roof, and then we close everything up. And I want to start at some of the main points and ideas that are reoccurrent throughout his book. The first idea is self-sacrifice, that people are willing to give up their own individuality to a movement in order to become a part of it, right? They are in a position, willing and almost hoping to give themselves to it. They are no longer an individual trying to operate, but rather a single piece, a moving cog in this machine, right? And Hoffer says, a mass movement attracts and holds a following not because it satisfies the desire for self-advancement, but because it can satisfy the passion for self-renunciation, right? When I read that, the only thing I can think about is that guy on the Jubilee.
And you don't believe in democracy?
I don't believe in
What
democracy.
are you doing here at a televised debate? This is democracy, not what a debate and disagreement.
Because it is the means to support an end. The reason we have free speech now is because we want to be openly talking about our opinions so we can get the state that we want. But it doesn't mean upholding free speech after we win.
It is this freedom from freedom type of thinking, which it's a bit of a difficult idea to get your mind around. But for people who feel like choice and options were available to them, but not properly satisfying paths they could take in order to fulfill their underlying needs, then they don't believe choice is what they need or options is what they need. They want to be a part of something greater than themselves. They want to self-submit. They want to fulfill the religious desires within them, right? If the communists win Europe, right? So remember, this is 1951. If the communists win Europe and a large part of the world, it will not because they know how to stir up discontent or infect people with hatred, but because they know how to preach hope. And frankly, that is such a mind-boggling thing to say, because no contemporary thinker approaches it in this way. People are so concerned with rooting out hatred, chasing it to the ends of the earth and off the cliff, and possibly jumping over to ensure that it dies. The problem is that we all have a rope attached to us, and we're a herd of buffalo running, and once one of us begins to jump off, then it forces the rest of us to. Hoffer says that isolation is the psychological force pushing people into this position of self-sacrifice. What he means is the type of isolation that is enforced upon you by being free or self-reliant, as he says. The idea that you are now responsible for your destiny. You must carve it out for yourself, right? And this can be very daunting. What do you mean I have to now go out into society and bend it to my will? Am I to, if the avenues do not work for me in the way that they are meant to, or in the way that they do for others, what am I to do about that? There is this inherent type of psychological weight that does not exist in a previous society where your father was a blacksmith, so now you know that you must dedicate your life to perfecting a form of blacksmith, just like your father. Your father was a duke, so you must become a duke, or you must be courtly, or you must be a part of these societies. Many of the avenues in life for us, or maybe were laid out before us. Many of the avenues of life were laid out before us. They were chosen for us. And it is only in modern society where we don't only have to politically choose our leaders, but we also have to individually choose our own destinies. And what happens is when we have to choose our own destinies, we become isolated from traditional bonds. We become isolated from family, from religion, from creed, as race, every sort of our ethnic group, our cultural heritage. We become isolated from all these because the amount of possibilities before us begins to open, and we must now decide. It's this type of analysis paralysis, this Netflix problem, as I like to call it, of what movie do you choose to watch when there are 500 movies, 1,000 movies to watch from? The psychological pressure of choice. What this means is that in a time and place when radicalization is rapidly increasing, those who are able to execute their own self-agency the most are the least likely to join them, right? Meaning that what we should be measuring for is those with the least amount of self-agency. I know I spent a lot of time on self-sacrifice, but this is something that is going to be reoccurring throughout his book and sits at the bottom of all of these ideas. The next most interesting idea is the deprecation of the present. If you imagine yourself sitting between two hills and you're in the middle, on either side there is this greatness where if you were in the past, your life would be better, and if you were in the future, your life would be better. If you think about the quote, born too late to explore the world, born too early to explore space. To me, this used to be just some innocuous, yeah, I guess that's kind of true. There is this kind of haze in the middle that we're sitting in, because if we were 200 years later, there would be that ability, and if you were born 200 years early, you would have that potential. But after reading this book, there's this pernicious undertone to it now of viewing the opportunities of discovery, the greatness that is associated with discovery could have been you, but you only have that because you have the knowledge of the present. The idea behind it is, oh, we could have explored the world. I could have been a conquistador of some sorts, or some Captain Cook type of adventurer, exploring the world, mapping out and charting, and Lewis and Clark treading across the West. If only I was born then I would have been that. Or if you were a space adventurer, you'd be doing all these cool, crazy Star Wars-like adventures, Star Trek-like adventures. There's this reimagining of the past and the uplifting and creating of an imaginary future that doesn't exist and likely won't exist. And it's so strange to come back and have those random pieces come back to me. But to me, it seems like those two mindsets, right? Self-sacrifice and the deprecation of the present, especially towards yourself, create and combine to form the exact mindset that make people ready to join these movements. Hoffer goes into who the exact kinds of people that fit this description are. But I think there's only a few I want to highlight because I think they are the most relevant to what people are experiencing today and what people on the internet are feeling. One is the creative poor, the person who has creative capacity, but they lack the ability to act on it because of, material conditions. He describes how these people make up a very specific type of person in these movements, right? And a very nice quote: "The decline of handicrafts in modern times is perhaps one of the causes for the rises of frustration and the increased susceptibility of the individual to mass movements," right? The lack of people to pursue an individual hobby or to satisfy the creative impulses within our brain. The only thing left for them to do is to use this on politics. When I see this, I think of all the amount of disgruntled artists, YouTubers, everybody, just the internet is full of these types of creative people who don't get anything for it. They're kind of forced to turn to politics in order to actually make a living out of things, or to, I guess, grift until they make it, right? The next is new poor. And what this means is it's people who had money and have recently themselves or within a generation become poor. And these are people who make up a very disgruntled, sort of cross people in society. And I think many middle class people, this is all over the internet, both sides. Anybody who is middle class, lower middle class, or upper middle class, whatever it is, just posts nonstop slop of, oh, the 1950s, you could have one income, have a house, drive a car, have a family. This just constant mindset, right? Is fomenting a type of unrest amongst middle class people, forcing them into politics, right? I mean, Hoffer says, "This class has a vivid memory of affluence and dominion that is not likely to reconcile itself to straitened conditions and political impotence." Ooh, scary, right? And I mean, you can see this. Within 10 years, people I personally know, people who arguably have no reason to complain, but because their position is not as good as their parents, everybody turns to politics. And imagine how many people fit that bill, right? If something like 80% of young people will never make as much money as their parents because those types of incomes, those types of jobs don't exist anymore. And you're fomenting your own revolt. Society's fomenting its own revolt. And in America, where it is the rule of the middle class, it is the catering to the middle class. Right now, catering to the geriatrics because the middle class became old. What do you do when there is no middle class anymore? Next is the ambitious facing unlimited opportunities. I love this one because it is so perfect. The Netflix problem for me is so pervasive in modern society. People are frozen by everything. People are unable to make decisions. And the fact that he points this out is sort of insane, right? If you can do everything, you basically end up doing nothing. And so many people end up in this position. A lot of the self-help content, some of the people that try and hack the self-help, one of the biggest things they say is you just have to go out and do it. You just have to try it. You have to actually see whether or not you're competent, because otherwise you're never going to know. You're going to sit there and resent everything. And the fact that most people, face these opportunities, but they'll probably never act on it because they don't actually want to act on it. They just see the opportunities before them and it weighs on their mind, right? This is a freedom from freedom because even if you work a job, have a family, raise kids, try and have a house, pay your bills, save for retirement, put your kids through college, do all the right things, the freedom of you could have done everything weighs on your mind the entirety of the time. It sits on your head like a little, I don't know, like Cupid like demon that it just kind of gnaws at you. And the convenience of politics is that you almost have to do nothing to join it. That's the convenience. It's very strange, but hobbies are difficult. Opportunities are difficult. Walking and opening doors is difficult. But just donating, saying a few lines, repeating a few words is easy, and suddenly you've become something. You're now a part of something. Now, the last and most prominent group to me is the board. To me, the board describes almost all people in politics. They just have nothing better to do. They don't know how to make themselves have something better to do. They are not interested in doing anything else. They're just free from all forms of whatever. And it's hilarious. When I read this, I was shocked. There is perhaps no more reliable indicator of society's ripeness for mass movements than the prevalence of unrelieved boredom. My goodness. If I read this before COVID, it would have been so easy to predict. Just the mass swelling of people into the streets to protest George Floyd. The amount of people who I knew who were just, I'm going to go protest George Floyd because they literally have nothing better to do. They don't have anything interesting to talk about. They don't have anything they're pursuing. They don't have anything meaningful going on for them. They're not trying to have a relationship. They're not trying to start a family. They're not trying to have a career, right? They're basically just meandering around. The fact that the amount of people who fit this bill now extends from like 18 to 30 to possibly even like many people going into their almost 40s is insane. Because this is what motivates young people. This is the motivation of young people. They're not the new poor. That's what the middle class people are. That's why basically the entirety of Gen X is 60% voting for Trump. They're scared of losing their house. They're scared of losing to taxes and getting ground down into poverty. It makes complete sense. The board, well, they have nothing. They're all young. Of course they're going to vote for whatever. Of course they're going to go out and protest. It makes them feel anything. People are inoculated from life. Now that we have our foundation, right? Now we can kind of discuss the actual dynamics of the movement and how it forms. I want to talk about a few more of his ideas, some of the, I guess, second order ideas. One of them is make belief. The idea that there is this fantastical, almost imaginary nature to being a part of these movements, right? Because you have to remember, these movements involve violence in many cases. They involve committing atrocities. They involve sort of this dehumanization of not only yourself, but your enemy. Putting the fantastical, I guess, theatrical element around all of these people kind of encapsulates them. It puts this nice little bow on the movement, kind of giving this grandness to it, saying that you're not just doing this because there's nothing else to do. You're doing it to be a part of something, right? You're doing it, and when you're doing it, you can feel the togetherness, right? If you think about why Trump has these WWE style engagements, right? In the big music, the crowd, the colors, the big flags, the soldiers, the speakers, the imagery, and he kind of walks out in the grandness. It becomes make believe, right? You are no longer doing something, you are believing in something. Now that the movement itself is make believe, now that the ideas, whatever they are make believe, the consequences attached to it are also make believe. Right? Because remember, it's not like you need to be coerced into doing it, right? You are already there. You are already renouncing yourself. You are already willing to give yourself, your individuality, and your soul to the movement. You just need something to hold you there. And make believe is one of those things. The last idea of his I'll talk about is doctrine. And I think this is one of the big mistakes that many people fail to really capture, because a lot of people are ideologically motivated in a sense. And Hoffer says that the words that people use, right, the ideas they use don't matter. You can, once you have the movement, you can guide it and move it and push it in any direction you want. But what that means, right, and many people make this observation, right? Trump changes his minds. The ideas are whatever. The woke people push the envelope to the ends of the earth and everybody just goes along with it. There is no position at which people are starting a priori. It is the purpose is to be a part of the movement. The reason people allowed themselves to get in the position where there was infinite genders is because they were not trying to figure out how many genders there actually are. And arguing that there's only two genders doesn't do anything, right? And it clearly didn't do anything, because that's not what's motivating them. That's not what's bringing them together. That's not what is creating the environment. That is not the dynamics of the environment. The ideas do not matter. Not in the way we think. The effectiveness of a doctrine should not be judged by its profundity, sublimity, or the validity of the truths it embodies, but by how thoroughly it insulates the individual from his self in the world as it is. My goodness, does not matter how effective, powerful, salient, even if it's true, doesn't matter. It is just whether or not the idea binds the group and whether or not it isolates them, right? Makes them willing to self-sacrifice. If free tacos every Tuesday was what people suddenly became willing to die for, to sacrifice every sense of freedom for, individuality, then every politician would be talking about Taco Tuesdays. It can be taken to its most absurd extreme, and it works. And the strange thing is that he is talking about this when many of the ideas of the early 20th century had much more intellectualized, formalized thinkings around them. They had books, they had pamphlets, just the continuous spurring on of writings. And today we're pushing the envelope on how much people are willing to believe. People almost don't believe in elections anymore. They don't trust anybody. They don't trust in anything. People can believe there's an infinite amount of genders. People can believe Elvis is still alive. You know? Now that we have our frame, the things that form what the movement looks like, right? The ideas. Now we need our drywall of sorts, right? We need to make the kitchen now look like a kitchen. We need to make the living room look like a living room, right? And we do that with unifying agents. I want to briefly touch on hatred as a unifier. And I think it gets so much attention because people imprint hatred of Jews on the Nazi as like the ultimate evil. But it is really just it is a powerful motivator, but it gets too much attention. People focus too much on it. The idea that if we just stopped hating, loved everybody, we would all cooperate is sort of a dream world in a sense, right? Because if we think about what hatred is, it is persistent anger. It's directed anger. And it is this natural consequence of just human interaction. The perceiving of slight, the getting screwed over, the being a sort of outcast of a group, right? Whatever it is, right? Some people are more or less forgiving than others. Some people succeed or don't succeed more than others. We have envious impulses that can turn into hatred, right? It is more than just outgroup I don't like, therefore I hate. It is much more deeper than that. It is not just I want to blame somebody else for my problems because I'm some insecure loser. Like, no, it is an involved and empowering tool. The release of hatred and the act of hatred grants a catharsis that is very, very powerful, right? And it's sort of strange because the older I've gotten, the more I've realized that the catharsis of sort of anger and hatred is it can be dangerous. And it's not really the desire to blame others, but rather the release of that anger is what makes it such a motivator. Hatred is hatred is just the drug, right? But the high is the enacting, the ability to get revenge, to have that final release. It's a very strange kind of feeling, especially because to me it is such an embodied experience. Not that I've like gone around and just kneecapped people for fun, but rather I've ran into things in my own life that have caused me to experience a hatred, and learning to kind of control that and kind of understand it and manifest it in a different way, rather than just bottling up or pretending that if I just love this person more it'll work, because it's like you just can't. There's a mental emotional block against it. Next, we have persuasion and coercion. And basically, what he's talking about here is propaganda, right? To me, this was a very eye opening section, because he says propaganda is not enough, right? It is the combination of propaganda and coercion or force, right? The propaganda under the threat of a gun is what makes it work, because people are already willing to believe, right? People are already renouncing themselves. People have already joined the movement, right? Do you need propaganda, right? Propaganda is just what keeps them insulated. It's what keeps them a part of the group in a sense. It prevents them from leaving now that they've joined, now that they've willingly given themselves. They have no other choice but to be propagandized. Hoffer says, the gifted propagandist brings to a boil ideas and passions already simmering in the minds of its bearers. He echoes their innermost feelings. Where opinion is not coerced, people can be made to believe already what they only know, right? It is reinforcement. It is not new. It is not bringing newfold ideas. These are things that people already believe, right? Propaganda by itself succeeds mainly with the frustrated. You cannot bring on new converts, right, with only propaganda. There needs to be a force tool involved, right? And he quotes Goebbels here. A sharp sword must always stand behind propaganda if it is to be really effective. You can all kind of see this in some of the events too. The usage of secret police to really bring on the last of the converts, because you get the revolution, you get the people who initially only need to find the movement that they can join. And then once they have gained enough momentum, you bring in the secret police, you bring in the firing squads, the roundups, in order to coerce the rest of the people and propagandize them into the movement as well, right? It is first by book and then by sword. I think the last portion is action. Things actually need to get done. If you do not, people can only operate on hope for so long, right? If you think about at all about just any type of organization, a corporation, a small company, just a political group, there are people who just have to do the work, because otherwise nothing happens. You don't move anything. You don't convince anybody. You don't have anything else to you don't have any more red meat to throw to people. Speech only gets you so far. And that seems to be the period we're entering in the current moment, that everybody is tired of the rhetoric. People want to see things get done. And if they don't, you are going to radicalize people even more. They are going to pursue the man of action, as he calls them. The people who will do anything. And it's so strange because when you look at it, right, in a democratic society, the president in America is meant to be chained up slightly. He's not meant to be some unilateral dictator capable of anything at will. People don't expect that. People don't want that. So the action that people are looking for is to fix the system, is to work the system, is to have it act. And if it continues to fail to act, if it continues to fail to find resolution, eventually people just give up on it because they believe it no longer works. And it seems like many, many people are kind of half co-opted into it. They at the very least are saying something is not working the way it's supposed to, and something needs to change. Something needs to happen. Something needs to be rewritten. There needs to be a change in the rules. There needs to be a change in the dynamics. There needs to be a change in the incentives. And so long as we just sit here and have Trump kind of like half-assedly bully his way through things and not get anything, zero legislative change, price transparency is not changing healthcare, deporting everybody and anybody does not solve immigration, saying we're going to build more houses does not solve housing, banning corporations from buying houses does not solve the housing shortage or the crisis or the price. 50-year mortgages definitely doesn't do it. Giving people $2,000 to have a child does not solve the birth rate crisis. To me, these are all half-assed, thrown to the winds attempts. To me, that's half the reason why they're focusing so much on foreign policy, is because foreign policy is squarely in the realm of the president. It's like the only thing he can do well because he has an apparatus of the most powerful military on the planet at his disposal. Of course he's going to be able to do it, and yet we can't have a plan or any type of contingency around something like bombing Iran. It's, to me, these are not actions. These are failed actions. These, in many ways, failed actions are worse than no action. Because the failed actions are viewed by the opposing side as abusive, as horrific, as fascistic. And all they do is radicalize them even more. And so you're creating and accelerating an environment where we desperately need to be doing the opposite. And now we return again to our analogy, and now we have to put the roof on our house. All right, because without the roof, you can't live in the house. No matter how vital we think the role of leadership is in the rise of a mass movement, there is no doubt that the leader cannot create the condition which make the rise of the mass movement possible, right? And then he just says it straight. He cannot conjure a movement out of the void. To me, what this means is that the left's answer of we just need to move past Trump. We just need to get rid of Trump. We just need to finish the job, whatever the dog whistle is. That is not going to solve it, right? If a tornado comes through and blows the roof off the house, you just pay for the roofers to come and build a new one. In fact, maybe the roofers come and offer to do it for free, right? The leader is crucial. He's important. He forms the most singular representative analogy for the movement. But he does not end the movement. The animus is still there. They will just coalesce under a new leader. They will just form anew. Or you will perhaps lose and it'll dissipate in some way, but it will come back with a vengeance, right? If, let's say, the unthinkable happens, maybe he loses a lot of the moderates, the people who were only half in anyways. But what do you do about the radicals? What do you do about the crazies? They might just find somebody more crazy, more perverse, more horrible. You need some level of redress, some level of reconciliation to kind of dissipate this in a proper, non-violent, non-radicalizing way. It's likely if what people are asking to happen, what people are looking for happen, yearning to happen, it would only incite all these people more. If I look to the other side, a lot of people view the Democrats and the woke movement sort of as struggling because they don't have a centralized leader. Right? And it's quite possible that if they did have a charismatic, formative leader, like if Obama did run, but with open-ended wokeism, then we would be living in a very different America, because he would have rallied and created a movement much greater and probably much more impactful than the one he did. Right? Maybe if Bernie Sanders was 20 years younger, or AOC was 10, 15 years older, and maybe 5 to 10 IQ points higher, you would have a much different, more scary kind of formative movement. But it just lacks the ability to really finalize and coalesce together, right? So the same thing is likely going to happen with the sort of reimagining of democratic image in the abundance. If they fail to unite people, to really hold them together, you may end up just dissipating and failing again. Now that we've finished the roof on our house, now we have to look at the finishing touches. Siding, the roofing, the windows. How pretty does our house look? Did our mass movement achieve what its end goal was? Are we a nice, beautiful, pristine mansion on the hilltop with a white picket fence? Or are we some dilapidated, broken, holes in the wall shack that wasn't even worth trying to build it in the first place? And this is kind of where Hoffer doesn't really give solid answers. He only gives clues, because it seems like he's not even really sure how to answer this question, because you're reading the future, you're predicting the future, right? You don't know whether or not a movement is going to be bad or good. But he insightfully points out, no matter how noble the original purpose of a movement or how beneficent the end results, its active phase is bound to strike us as unpleasant, if not evil. This is strange, because I have had this type of perpetual feeling about the current environment in America, that no matter who is getting elected, there's always this active movement happening on the other side, this radicalization, this swelling of the ranks, right? And it is extremely unsettling, because the people, the kingmakers, the amount of force meant to maintain the stability of a democratic society is shrinking, and the amount of people who are not just trying to potentially undermine, but revolutionize society in some way is growing. Right? Like if we compare this to the civil rights movement, you get more and more people swelling the ranks. You get the converts, the true believers, moving more and more in that direction. And it gets dissipated by legislation. And you go, okay, good. Now they can Now they can stop. Now the growing force, the rock rolling down the hill fell and stopped on a tree, right? It ended, right? Because maybe if it doesn't end, right, historically, if it just keeps rolling down the hill, it ends up rolling over a village, right? And in the real world, rolling over the village means you end up in a civil war where people are fighting each other. You get mass violence in some way. Now it's the what if. How do we move forward from the current moment? How do we maintain a liberal democracy without turning to mass violence? What is it that is necessary? There needs to be something that stems the bleeding. We can't just keep hoping that we have more blood to give. Perhaps we need to count our losses, move on, just admit defeat in some ways. Not total and utter defeat, utter collapse. Just give a little bit. Make a little bit of room. There's so much historical precedence in democracy for that. That if you just give a little bit, you might get something. The things you really want, the things you really need. But the problem is that if they keep doubling down, if they keep pushing, they will just win. They will get it. They're in an all-out battle. They're in a zero-sum game. There's no backing off of it. This is why they don't actually care about what's radicalizing people. They just form whatever narrative they want and say, this is what it is. Who cares? Like I said, we can't back off the ledge. Nobody wants to back off the ledge. In fact, there's this fervor of people who are ready to stand up on the ledge and just wait and just pray and hope. And everybody else is just kind of slowly being goaded into standing up there. Maybe we need some level of punishment. It doesn't need to be that much. Just needs to be an admittance of blame and to push them to the side. The same way the Khrushchev just said, yeah, Stalin was bad, he's dead though, so let's just move past it. Maybe once Trump's out, the next candidate just comes in and goes, Trump was bad, we're not going to do that. The next Democratic candidate just comes on and goes, yeah, the woke people are stupid. Just ignore them. We don't need them. We're going to do things that matter, that work. I mean, maybe it's naive. Maybe it's a terrible practice because you're giving up too much, but it's not the fanatics that win in a democracy. It's not the crazies that win you. It's not the extremists and the radicals that win you in democracy. It's the moderates. It's the people who wouldn't really care to know anymore or know better. It's the people who are just regular people who can be convinced by something like those crazy people you were worried about. They're just going to go away. We're not going to deal with them anymore. They're wrong. We're sorry we supported them. It's not that hard to say. I'm sorry I voted for Trump. Sorry I supported something crazy. Let's just try and do it better this time. We're on the right path. We just need to do it better. We need to do it in a more specific way. Who knows? Maybe there's just no chance of salvaging anything. We just have to go until it powder kegs and explodes. Four out of 5. The fact that he did this in his spare time is impressive. So many relevant ideas to today. Too bad nobody will spend any time reading this one. As always, I learned a lot. Hopefully you did too. Remember to subscribe and like. Catch you guys in the next one.